Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are talking about the orchid lies. We insist on saying because, well, not because we like to lie, but because they are actually in the benefit of other people. But in fact, if you really think about it, they're lies. And the problem is, some of us really get hung up on these lies and we cannot really see left, right much. We're just like, oh, no, that's the thing, that's the law. We have to follow that law because all heck will break loose if not. And that's really not the case. And this video is actually inspired by a comment that I got recently when I posted my Tolumnia towers, which many of you know for a while now. Somebody told me that they hate to burst my bubble, but those Tolumnias will rot because there's not enough ventilation on or in that shelf. Oh boy. It sounds a bit scary, right? Yeah, well, it's been a few years already. Let's just keep waiting and see when they eventually rot. Things are not really as black and white as we think they are. So today I'm going to tell you about all of these things that even I say to you guys in my tutorials, which are actually lies. Yes, I'm lying to you guys, but they're in your benefit when you're beginners. When you're not beginners anymore, there's no more excuse. So before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it and you learned something new. And hey, why not something new or what did I say? Did I say something new? I meant to say something new. And hey, why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week and it's completely free. But if you're feeling a little extra about it, do consider further supporting the channel by becoming a member, checking out the affiliate links down below, checking out the new merch, links below. Aren't they pretty? Or using the super thanks option below my videos. Right, with that said, let me get my list. I have a list as always. Oh, no, before I get my list, my co-host today is a purple Brassavola. Not really. It's not a Brassavola, it's a Brassavola hybrid, and I think she's gorgeous. Oh no, I can't remove the tag. This is Brassavola, no, Cattleya araguayensis, crossed with Brassavola cucullata, and it looks kind of like purple Brassavola, and I love her so much. Right, let's get to that list. Alrighty, let's actually start with the air movement situation, right? So you might have heard it a million times in articles, even in my tutorials. Orchids really need or benefit from air movement. That is a lie. They don't need air movement. I mean, maybe yours do, but maybe mine don't need air movement. I have special orchids. No. So here's the deal. The deal with air movement. Air movement is beneficial indirectly. Why? Air movement helps water evaporate. That's the real problem. Water sitting in between the leaves and the crowns, the joints of the leaves. Water sitting. That's a big problem. Sitting water causes rot sometimes through accumulation of bacteria and pathogens. Always in water, pathogens will proliferate, they will multiply faster than in dry conditions. Now, naturally, puddles of water, they don't sit around all that much. Have you ever noticed that sometimes after a good heavy rain, after a few hours, the puddles are like gone? Or most of them are gone, especially when it's warm. Where are the puddles? They're not there anymore. Well, there are some things that help with water puddle evaporation. One, air movement. Yes, the wind and the breeze absolutely helps with water evaporation. But also, second, temperature. That's the real MVP that sometimes or most of the times we do not talk about, because when we are doing these tutorials and articles and videos, we don't really know how many people and what type of environments people grow their orchids in and what type of orchids they grow and so on. We go from the premise that most homes have an average temperature, like an intermediate temperature. People usually don't like to sit in very hot temperatures or very low temperatures. So we assume that most people watching have that middle ground temperature, between 22°C maybe and 24°C, which we usually feel comfortable with. But it's not the case with everybody, is it? It might be the case with the big majority, but not everybody, right? So some people will be out of that comfort zone, and some people will be in the hot type of environment, which is me. And when I say environment, I don't only mean outside temperatures and environment, but also let's take the example of the detolf shelf. Because of the grow lights inside and all of that, that shelf tends to be warmer than the ambiental air that I have here. So when we say that orchids need air movement, it's because we want that water to evaporate. No one cares about air movement, to be fully honest. Orchids don't care either. They want that water, let's say, to evaporate faster because we're growing them upright, we're growing them in our homes. So the easiest way to make sure that the water evaporates is through air movement, not with cranking the heat to 28 degrees Celsius, right? Heat is very expensive. It's so expensive. I saw a meme, sorry, I digress. I saw a meme, so funny and sad, of a guy turning on the heat this winter, and in the background, a voice from one of those guys who holds bids and talks about the bid so fast, like 20, 20, do I have more? 25, 25 in the corner, 30. I cannot reproduce, like something like that. It's like, that's how it is. Heat is expensive, oh my gosh. So instead of telling you guys crank up the heat, no, make sure you have a fan running or something to move the air and evaporate that water. It's much easier, much cheaper, and it applies to more people than the temperature thing would apply. Now me, as I was saying, I happen to live in very warm conditions for most of the times, and even if they're not very warm right now outside, it's very warm in my detolf shelf. So the water evaporates because of the warmth. I don't need the air movement all that much. I sometimes need air movement, but in very, very special conditions. And in all of my IKEA cabinets, which are not like sealed, there's always air exchange. They're not sealed, but air movement like wind, there's no wind there. What there is high temperature, and that's enough to evaporate whatever puddle of water I might create. I don't create puddles of water purposely. I try not to. Sometimes it happens, but I don't have issues because the temperature is enough to evaporate that water. So that's why the air movement nonsense, it's a lie. But it's a very helpful lie. Just don't get hung up on it. Next up, orchids need to dry out before rewatering them. Okay, that's a lie. And yes, I say it many times actually. It's a lie. I'm lying to you guys. But no, orchids don't really need to dry before rewatering. They don't need to. I have some orchids that don't dry before rewatering them, and that's better for them. But see, if you make sure that the roots and the medium dries before you rewater, again, for maybe a majority of people, it's just much safer because not everybody has very dry, very warm conditions like I do. And especially those people who live in much cooler and much more humid conditions than I do, for those, it will be especially helpful to leave those orchids completely dry out. You also extend the life of your potting mix by letting it dry out. Maybe for you, this Tolumnia will dry out in 10 days. For me, it dries in 2. That's why I put it in self-watering. And to be fully honest, I would much rather it not dry. Tolumnias are thirsty little beasts and they go shriveled in my conditions very, very fast, which I'm sure doesn't happen for everybody. For me, it does. But just because it can happen to me and a few other people, just because of that, we cannot say like a blank statement, orchids need to dry before rewatering. No, I say it because I want to keep your orchid safe. Will it hurt your orchid if it, gets dry before you rewater it? No, if you rewater it in time, if you don't wait a month to rewater, it's not going to hurt it. It's not going to get dehydrated. Orchids are epiphytic. Most of the orchids we grow are epiphytic, and they're very well adapted to conserve the water and just be tolerant to drought. So there's no harm in saying, let it dry out and then water it just to be safe, because I don't know your home conditions. I don't want you to do things exactly like me because maybe it's not going to be good. But, don't also assume that if they don't get dry, all heck will break loose and all the roots will rot and everything. No, they won't. As long as there is some ventilation and you don't have like the medium very compact, very fine, very compressed to actually limit air, as long as that doesn't happen, your orchid can be wet at all times. Have you ever seen those vandas? I mean, you have in my videos, with algae on their roots? Yeah, algae doesn't grow if roots get dry very often or very dry. Algae only grows in high moisture conditions. If algae grew on the roots of the vanda, trust me, the root of the vanda was mostly wet, not dry. And it still grew, right? So that's why letting orchids dry out is a lie, is a myth. It's a beneficial one, to be fully honest, and especially when you make tutorials for a lot of people. But don't get hung up on it because it's not really all that black and white. Oh, another one. Orchids need filtered sun. They don't need filtered sun. They need some light, okay? They do not grow if you put them under your desk, but they don't need filtered sun. You can keep your orchid in full sun if the temperature on the surface of the leaf is not very high. For example, I have some orchids outside right now. I have some Australian orchids, dendrobiums, and some sarcochilus. I'm trying to give them a chill. They are in a position which receives full sun now, especially in the first part of the day. But it's really nice and cold and breezy outside that their leaves actually, they don't really get hot. So they don't burn, they don't do anything, and they are full sun, no filtered, no nothing. Furthermore, I grow many of my orchids under artificial light. We cannot say anything about any filtered sun there. So no, you don't necessarily need to filter that sun. Sometimes you can offer it straight and direct, but it has to do with the temperature, the ambiental temperature that you grow your orchids in. But see, there are too many if, buts, it has to do with, it depends. We don't like to use too much these words when we're making a general tutorial. We kind of want to deliver information in a very simple, easy to understand way that will help the most people. And sometimes that implies lying. We're a bunch of liars. So just so you know, the filtered sun thing might not be all that accurate. You have to be very careful with the sun though. There are some places on Earth where even if you think the temperature is pretty cool and the sun will not harm anything, it's gonna scorch your orchid, because sometimes, depending where you are, the sun's rays can be more perpendicular than angled. I think that's the way you expressed it. And if they're perpendicular, they scorch. So be careful. Next. Water orchids from below. Some people do insist that I should water my orchids from below. Again, you don't have to. And to give you a little secret, nobody that is experienced with orchids waters them from below anymore. That's again a very common beginner advice to give. Why? Very simple. If you put water in this container and then you put the orchid in, the chance of that water to somehow magically splash and fall directly into the crown and in between the leaves is very minimal. Can you imagine all of the theatrics I just showed you? I would have to be a magician, right? It's not gonna happen. So in the end, what we want is for you guys that are very early beginners not to have any incidents with water drops in between the leaves and all of that, because what if you have the type of environment which does not promote water evaporation too much, right? It's kind of maybe humid, kind of coolish. If you get one of those drops in the crown, it's not good. So the only way to completely eradicate the possibility of water traveling in the crown of your orchid is to do this. It's watered. At this point, knowing that this orchid is going back in the detolf shelf where everything is very toasty, very nice, very toasty, it likes warm temperatures. Even if I put a drop in the crown of this orchid, nothing bad will happen. It's fine. But I would not recommend it to beginners. So that's the whole issue with watering from below or dunking the orchids in water. You don't have to. It's safe if you don't trust that, you're not gonna rot your orchid. You know what I'm saying? Because I lost my train of thoughts. Oh, another one. This is an oldie but goldie. I talked about it before, but sometimes it makes an appearance in the comment section and I'm filled with joy whenever I see the comment. Orchids need transparent pots because roots photosynthesize. That is a lie. The part where roots photosynthesize is not a lie. Most roots do photosynthesize. They have chlorophyll pigments allocated to the roots, and yes, they can photosynthesize. The epiphytic orchids, not the terrestrial orchids. Paphs, jewel orchids, they don't. But Tolumnias, Cattleyas, Phalaenopsis, yes, they do photosynthesize. Does it mean that they have to? No, it doesn't. And yeah, I've talked about this many times in the past. The only reason why we use I don't know why I'm showing you this because it's not transparent, but the only reason why people and me in the past use transparent pots is that it's easier to see the roots and see if they're healthy, easier to tell when it's time to water. It's just easier for beginners. But orchids don't really rely on the photosynthesis that the roots provide. It provides basically nothing. If it did provide more than I think it does, then my orchids that ran out of leaves, sorry, I'm not crying, I'm a little sick and my throat is a little glitchy. I'm gonna cut out the horrible coughing. Don't worry, but just so you know, I'm not crying. I'm just sick. Okay, so the orchids that suddenly ran out of leaves in my collection over the years due to pests and stuff, they should have just grew back absolutely fine if the roots took care of the photosynthesis, but they didn't, because the roots don't photosynthesize enough. Yes, like people like to point out, Kylokistas. Yeah, well, Kylokistas don't need that much energy to produce leaves in the first place, so they don't need leaves. They photosynthesize only with their roots because they only have roots and tiny, tiny little leaves if they feel like it, and flower spikes from time to time. They don't have pseudobulbs, they don't have leaves, they don't have all of these complicated structures. So let's forget about Kylokistas in this context because it really doesn't matter. And the last one that I have here, I don't think I can think of another, but you can come up with other ideas. I like this one so much. Orchids need a fast draining mix. Tell me my orchid needs a fast draining mix when all I can live with is sphagnum moss. Why do we need a fast draining mix? Again, because especially if you're a beginner, or especially when we don't know what type of environment you have, yeah, we don't want that water just pooling somewhere. We don't want it pooling in between the leaves and the crown and stuff, but we don't also want it to pool inside the potting mix. Because if you have too much water in there that is soggy and restricts aeration, you can rot the roots. Does it really happen all that much? But honestly, I find that rotting roots has more to do with decaying or unsuitable potting mix than it has with water. But still, it doesn't really hurt all that much to have the water fast draining through the pot, not lingering too much, unless you live in my environment, case in which fast draining potting mix are the stuff of nightmares. Kid you not. I could not live without sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss, as you know, it's not a fast draining potting mix. It's not even a potting mix, it's just a potting. So no, if I pour water in this pot first, it will soak up that water like a sponge, get really nice and soaked and wet, and then it will start to drip whatever. So this is not a fast draining potting mix. None of my potting mixes are fast draining, and that's okay. For some environments, that's okay. For other environments, fast draining is the way to go. But see, we always want things to be safe. Is it gonna hurt if my pot would be fast draining? No, it's not gonna hurt the orchid. It's gonna hurt my back, but nobody cares about my back. We care about orchids here. So yeah, you have to do some trial and errors after you hear about, let's say, these rules that me and other people or other articles are putting in front of you. We are working with the safest options, the safest ways. Are they always the best ways? No, they're not always even the most healthy ways or fun ways, or they're not even ways. They're just stuff we put out there just to say something. How will I explain to you guys that this orchid, she likes moisture around their roots, but she also likes some aeration there, but not really wind, because you know, you can have air if you have small air pockets, but not too big air pockets. But small pockets are actually necessary. And when you water, it's good to have water, but you have to have air as well, because if you don't have air, you can suffocate your orchid. And also try not to let stuff pool too much in here, because if it pools too much and it doesn't evaporate, that's not good. If it pools a little and it evaporates in a few days, that's fine. How am I going to tell you all of those things in 3 seconds? You see what I'm saying? Sometimes we need to tell you a few lies in order for your orchids to be safe, generally speaking. And when I say you, that's the problem. When I say you, I say all of you, but this will not apply to all of you. And always reminding you that, hey, this will not apply to all of you, becomes tiring for you. For me, maybe not so much. I'm the type of person who likes to be very explicit, and I like to really make sure that you understand what I'm saying, even in real life, which can be a problem for some people. But it gets tiring for other people. They want fast information, and some information can be delivered fast while other information cannot. So we're doing the best we can. But if we have to lie, we will lie. You have to be aware that we are lying to you. And don't get hung up on the lies. Just have a little flexibility. Things are not always as they appear, even if I say they are. Anyway, I think that's about it for today. It's a little late. I have to go make lunch. Okay, so that's about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye.